These models show habitats built into the rim of a very large crater on the equator of the moon that are home to 40 people who live there for the rest of their lives, being the first residence of a colony that eventually houses over 20,000 people at the end of this first phase of the colony. And then after that, the crater that this is on the rim of is covered over and becomes a city that's home to over 1 million people. So these habitats are designed with the intention that people can live here happily for decades. You can feel the sun, you can see the sky. You can grow pretty much any kind of plant here, including trees. It's got a lot of space, enough to feel sort of like being outside. It's got these huge windows that reflect the sky, and especially the earth, into the interior, so people can always see the most beautiful thing there is on the moon. This first atrium is 40 meters high and has 9 floors that are suspended from the huge arches over the glazing. The blue rectangles are row on row of planters that rotate to optimize use of the light. Below them is a pond that helps to process wastewaters and broaden the budding biosphere to include aquatic life. Next, we'll go down some compact stairs specially designed for lunar gravity. There's lots of things in this environment that are odd but are designed for the special conditions here. Once we're done with this initial walkthrough, so you know the layout, we'll go back and look at the main ones and explain what they do. For instance, that tall blue thing in the corner is a gym for the residents, where they can really take advantage of lunar gravity. And now we'll turn into the tunnel section. This area is also lit by sunlight during the day, funneled in by special collectors above it. We pass the side passage to the other atrium. Bear in mind that it's 8 meters tall. This design goes for open layouts and lots of space, but later on all the details will be filled in so that that space is optimized. Right now it's bare bones. We come up on 3 huge windows looking over the bowl of the crater. The crater isn't in this draft of the model yet though. It'll look pretty cool once it's added. Those windows also have their own radiation barrier on the upper half that would also reflect in the earth, but you have to be on the top floor in order to see it. Next we'll hop over to the pond, which is about 1 meter deep and will be filled with aquatic plants in a simplified marsh ecosystem. It has a glass floor on top to optimize space and reduce humidity from evaporation. Shots from this angle really get across how big this space is. The garden next to it is going to be filled in with trees and bushes, but it'll also be possible to play here like the green men are doing. As we pan up, imagine climbing up this vertical gym and jumping from the platform at the top. And then notice the glass floors that maximize how much sun gets in, and notice that giant Earth 16 times the size of the moon as seen from our world. All the processing of air and water and human waste happens in the bottom portion of the tunnel. And all of this is connected to a set of giant tanks outside of the habitats that also handle thermal regulation. The huge volume of water they hold keeps temperatures cool enough in the day and can be used to keep the habitats warm at night. Now we'll look closer at some things in this live view of the working files for the colony. The way the tank system works is that there's a huge amount of water so that the huge amount of heat that pours in during the day with the sunlight won't heat up the habs very much, because that huge main cold water tank circulates a large part of its water during the day through the main floor of the tunnel. So it's radiant cooling essentially, and then there is a set of pipes winding through the long narrow tanks, which are really the cooling towers, so to speak, they're filled with ammonia and water, and day and night they are shedding heat through the radiator units to space. Oops. You basically have to cool all the time because vacuum doesn't carry heat away. You have to radiate it away, and that's a constant job. The hot water is in these two smaller tanks, but they're still quite large, and they are heated by also pulling excess heat from the radiator unit along the top of the atrium that is connected to heat pumps that then go to these two tanks. And excuse me, first one tank is used and then another, and they go back and forth. So cold water circulates through the blue floor of the tunnel, and those water pipes carry excess heat away to be cooled in the cold water tank. And at the corners of the tunnel there are these large tubes that are pulling air all day long from the atrium and cooling it as well and keeping the air moving, and it goes to the end of the tunnel and then circulates back. And under the blue floor there's all sorts of infrastructure for the messy stuff. These are the toilets, and the toilets are really complicated, and I don't know how much people want me to go on about them, but this is all the infrastructure under the floor for the dry composting toilets that everybody uses. They separate liquids and solids, and in a way that relieves the inhabitants of odors as much as possible, dries out the solids, which are then moved to the composter, and separates and purifies the liquids. All of the little chemicals that are left over in that process are mostly useful for other things. Sometimes some of them are very valuable indeed, so all of that is recycled very carefully. Now, we just traveled along the huge length of this tank. The tank is huge partly because the more water you have inside the hab, the more energy it takes to heat up the hab. So more water is good. And also the more water you have, the more time there is for microbes in the water to clean it so that as little as possible is done chemically, and then it can be recycled back to the main water tank and used as potable water. But there is a two-stage process here. Waters from the showers, which are above these smaller tanks, first go to each of those tanks as gray water, and then they're sent to the larger tank, and then from there back to the main tank. It's a very large system. However, if you can make it big in respect to this, you should make it big. It makes it easier for the job to get done. The showers for the residents are all in this row. There's 8 of them, and they're quite large because everybody who lives here is, they're all couples. So if you want, you can shower together, and that saves on water because plumbing here is so complicated that all the showers are not put in the quarters, which are over here. They are all in that one place there. There are more toilets here, so that in the night you don't have to go so far to reach a toilet, but all the showers are over there. Because the gravity is so low, again, the furniture hasn't been built. Everything here is still pretty initial. But a small sink with a water tank that has to be manually refilled, that can be done in each of these living units. Because you know what? Since you yourself weigh only 1/6 of what you would normally weigh. Even I let's say I weigh 60 kilograms. That's approximately right. I could carry a water tank that weighs 300 kilograms. That's 300 liters, which would last a while. And so that way you can have your own little sink in your quarters. Here's the laundry area above the kitchen. The washers have their own radiator above them that is also hooked up to a heat pump, so that the excess heat from the drying cycle for the clothes is pulled away and sent to the hot water tanks. I put in a few more green men for scale. I actually realized when I did that the laundry sink was way too big and I had to shrink it down, and now it's got this funny patch behind it. Underneath is the kitchen. This has a few stations in it so that up to maybe half a dozen people could be doing things here at the same time, either because they want to make a big group meal or several couples want to each make their own thing at the same time. It would take a bit of coordination for everybody to be able to get along here together. Really the best thing, and really what it's designed for, is group cooking, which is nice. It also has radiators, well, not really radiators, heat pumps connected to the hoods above the stove area so that the heat is taken away to the hot water tanks and all of the odors are filtered immediately. That's why the hood comes down so low. The air volume inside these habitats is not that big, considering that there is no outdoors. So handling odors is a constant job, and anything that's a source of odors, you want it connected to a large, robust system that can handle that right away. And these are ovens, and they are connected above ground to, let me see if I can take it to you, to one example quickly. I haven't built the one for them, but they're going to have their own solar collector, heat concentrator. These ones are for light, but the ones for the ovens will be for roasting things slowly. They're also fairly large, so that cooking can happen that way as well. That way, you know, if you can do things with sunlight instead of using power and electricity to do them, better to do it that way. And because they go through the wall into the vacuum environment, the vacuum outside helps keep that heat inside the ovens. There are 2 walk-in fridges. There's the one down here that's for frozen stuff, and there's the one up here which is more of a larder for things that are just need to be kept cool. Both are very large. If we can go through the wall here and look at them on the outside, they are big. The more food you can store between deliveries from Earth, the better. And this goes again with the philosophy of bigger is better if you can do it. This is the dining area. And now let's go and look over at this funny thing, the algae production unit. Algae is a way to pull carbon dioxide out of the air and fix it in the algae that continuously grows. You would need to bubble the air from the atrium through these tubes so that it mixes thoroughly and the algae takes that carbon dioxide and uses it to grow. So these are transparent tubes so they get enough light. They don't need an awful lot of light though. This is a very initial design. Also up here, if we look straight down, there's the gym underneath the glass floor. I don't know how people feel about this floor. It's important for getting as much light as possible to the bottom there where the garden is and the pond. And of course all the support structures aren't here yet. I think I'd love to play with this glass floor, but other people might not feel the same. But then if you're afraid of heights, maybe Moon isn't the place for you, because I think this would be awesome. But this is 35 meters high. Now, when you jump down, that red area is all extremely well padded, and you can land on it and there's no problem. You won't hurt yourself at all. And the gray areas are trampolines, which is really awesome, because then you can time it and bounce off again and pretty much reach the level where you jumped off of in the first place. So to me, this would be a great place to exercise, and I'd have a lot of fun with it. The mesh is small enough that you can climb up and down it. You can jump between the mesh and the walls that have these grooves on them, so you can grab hold. And all of these ropes have padded spots on them so that you can grab hold of them and climb up and down them and jump between them. This is a parkour heaven here. But it's really tall. So if you don't like heights, maybe you'd have trouble getting used to it. But I think it's definitely the way to go. Certainly, because it's so much easier to move around, 1/6 gravity, this is really what it would take to do exercise where you really get your heart rate up and really feel it. And you need to do that. If you don't do that, your muscles are going to atrophy, your bones are going to lose mass, your circulatory system will suffer. It's really important. All the stairs in the habitats have steps that are much larger than steps on Earth, because at 1/6 gravity, it takes as much work to go up 50 centimeters as it does to go up, what would that be, like 8 centimeters? It's nothing. So, but 50 centimeters is probably about as high as a step can be before, for people on the short side, like me, it starts to be a bit uncomfortable to bend your leg up that much. So that's the size of these stairs, 50 centimeters. Sometimes they're a bit more, 55, 60, 45. And the idea here is that you can step side to side as you go up. And if you need to steady yourself, then you can use the central pole. And if you are going down, you could actually just slide down that central pole. And it might take a little bit of getting used to, but these are very compact stairs, and they avoid the problem that while gravity is less, inertia is not less. And if you were going up and down regular stairs, you might want to rush, because after all, it's so easy, but your forward inertia would easily cause you to fall. This allows you to go fast without having forward or backward inertia that can throw you off balance. And once you're used to them, I think it would be very easy to carry things up and down this. After all, it happens slowly enough, if you want it to, that it's easy to keep your balance. So these are our moon stairs. But there's also another kind of moon stair. Let's see if I can get over here quickly. These ones are more standard, kind of stairs. They wind around so that, again, you don't get too much forward momentum built up, and they are meant for carrying large things up and down the height of the atrium, which is really quite high, of course, and they provide access to all the planters for all the work that needs to be done on them. The walkways behind the planters aren't there yet, but they'll all be accessible so that people can tend the plants. Now let's look at the radiator units. These two radiator units have to shed all of the heat that comes in during the day, mostly as sunlight, and it can do that over the course of the day and the course of the night, so that the heat budget balances out. And the main panel is made out of heat pipes, and the tank here, those heat pipes coil around in there and exchange heat with the fluid that ultimately comes from those great big tanks underground that we saw earlier, the cooling tower tanks. So these radiators rotate over the course of the day, so that the main panel is always edged onto the sun like this, so the sun never strikes it directly. And the shape, the sort of boat shape around it, is made of reflective foil, so that the heat from the ground, because the ground gets up to 120 degrees Celsius over the course of the day, that never touches the radiator panels. And also nothing reflects off that foil onto the radiator panels. And the way that works is that these are parabolas, and they're parabolas with a focal point above the radiator. So even when it's close to noon, it's late morning right now, but even during the like 100 hours where the sun would be very high overhead, any rays coming in will bounce off this parabolic shape, and one way or another it will be reflected back out again. They'll never focus in on the radiator. At most, they'll bounce back out up to a point above it where the focal point is. So that's how these rads can be efficient both day and night, working all the time, being able to reflect out all of the infrared light rays that come off the panels, but never reflecting any of the strong light rays from the sun onto the panels. Now we'll look at the solar collectors. They collect sunlight that they funnel into the tunnel section of the habitat below. They also work using parabolic mirrors, which are focused onto the end of this little spot. All of this, which is several meters across, all goes into that little round area there. And then there are fiber optic cables connected to this teal cable, and all those fiber optics go down through that tube and into the tunnel. Let's see if I can get this right so I can show you. There's quite a bit of regolith between here and there, so that it blocks all the radiation nicely and doesn't let... Oh, where is it? Let's see here. Get a little way. There it is. This is the outlet of that tube. And the outer surfaces of it at the bottom are all reflective and angled, so that light is spread over a very large area. Because sunlight on the moon is very intense. It's approximately 30% more intense than noonday sun on the equator on Earth. So in order for it not to be uncomfortable, you have to put it over a very large area. And that's one of the reasons why there are these glass floors in various parts of the hab, is so that you can do more with less sunlight. Because of course, this light is also heat, and those rads we just looked at have to get rid of that heat. This isn't quite complete, obviously, but all of these collectors, that's what they do. And they turn over the course of the day, of course. They turn on this axis, right on that point here. All they have to do is turn around that 180 degrees from dawn to dusk, and it can capture sun that's just as intense at dawn as it can at noon and at dusk. So it's throwing in a lot of sun. And even though you have to shed the heat, because it's so important psychologically to feel the sun and be in a bright area, I think it's worth it to have this many collectors. Now it's time to talk about radiation barriers. And in order to do a decent job at this in a relatively brief time, we're going to take a very simplified view that looks just at the things that are really hard to deal with, high energy cosmic rays. This barrier is 6 meters thick, filled with regolith, specifically so that it can stop those particles. This side of it is mirrored so that people looking through the windows back there can see a view of the sky, and from below the barrier they can look down and see a view of the crater, which at the moment isn't there. So they get a good view and they're safe from the insidious effect of high energy cosmic rays. It takes this much material to dissipate all of the energy in one of those rays, because they are nuclei of atoms that are traveling at a large fraction of the speed of light. When they hit another atom, they smash its nucleus and send a spray of particles streaming forward, and if you're hit by one of those, it'll do quite a bit of damage that your body doesn't know how to repair. It can repair the damage from lower energy kinds of radiation, but that hit is a lot of damage at once, and it's much harder to repair. Okay, so this is the radiation blind design, and it does the same thing as the other radiation barrier in a different way. So if there's nothing between you and the sky, then the amount of damage you get is much less, because you're only dealing with one particle, and it's actually pretty likely that as it's traveling through your body, it won't hit anything at all. So that's okay. And the other thing that's okay is if there is so much material between you and the sky that all of the energy is dissipated. So here through these gaps you have the first situation, and off to the side there's so much material in these beams, you've got the second situation. And in between those two options there's a small set of angles where those particles don't go through enough material to be completely diffused, and you get a stream of particles from those very small angle ranges, and you get some damage from that. But overall, these beams eliminate the vast majority of that radiation, with the stellar benefit that they let in a lot of natural sunlight, which means you get a sky, you get sun, and you get natural plants. It's a trade-off, but the dose is something your body can handle, and the rest is worth it, right? These beams, these ladder sections, are inside the glazing, and they can move. They can slide across so that they block the gaps between the beams. So if there is a solar storm, when radiation from the sun can spike quite intensely, that can all be blocked out so that it doesn't hit the plants here in the planters, especially because people could retreat into the tunnel and be out of that radiation. But A, solar storms can last for like a day sometimes, and B, the plants would all die, which isn't good. So by closing that off, they're protected. Another thing I just wanted to mention is that the reason why there's these bands in these planters is because the program calculated that the light from the Earth is strong enough that it would be visible this way. This is earth shine. That's what the bands on the garden are. Well, at night, when the earth was full, the amount of light that it would send into the atrium would be enough to read by. Pretty cool. Okay, and now we're going to look at the last weird thing. Okay, here is the last weird thing. I've hidden a bunch of layers so we can get a good clear look at it, because it's a hard thing to explain well. This is a human centrifuge. Right now it's in its stowed position. The idea is that these arms would be fanned out to form a ring just above this center floor of the tunnel. And although this hasn't been modeled yet, between each arm there would be fabric and mesh and cords so that it forms a continuous surface, and then it would be spun up and people could climb up the central axis of the centrifuge onto a platform, and from there climb out to the edge of the centrifuge into this area, which is large enough to stand up and easily whether it was stopped or moving. And the reason why it's designed this way, so that you can get on or off whether it's moving or stopped, and that is this nice large space, is that every resident of the moon would need to exercise, or at least be on, a contraption like this at a guess for at least an hour a day, every day. And because there's lots of people in this colony, more and more as time goes on, you need to be able to have the flexibility to get on and off without having to coordinate your activity with a bunch of other people. So when you were on this, doing this exercise, it would be a strange sensation because there's always going to be the 1/6 gravity of the moon pulling you down. But when the centrifuge is spinning, you'd feel a force equivalent to a full Earth gravity pulling you outwards. So you would do your exercise on this outer rim surface. But you wouldn't be able to jog or jump or things like that without that downward pull of the moon getting in the way. You might be able to move around if you leaned very carefully so that you compensated for that. But basically you're always going to have to make use of handholds and things like that. And all those things will be modeled in, and it'll be thought about what kinds of exercises would be good to do in here. Lots of people are going to be on it every day, so it'd be good if there was some kind of set of activities designed for it so that it'd be more fun. Because depending on how much the human body needs a full gravity in order to do all the many thousands, possibly millions of processes the human body has to go through every day, you might need to be on here for hours. We don't know yet. Medical doctors who specialize in this in general feel that although people can spend time and space for months and this has not been a huge problem, if you're going to live in space anywhere, probably you're going to need a full gravity environment in order to be truly healthy. Certainly once we're talking about children or pregnancy, it's almost certainly critical. This is the beginning of thinking about that. That's the last weird item, and there are other things such as power systems which have been thought about but haven't been modeled yet, and I'll get into those in future videos. Also things like the air supply, how it's extracted from the regolith, the oxygen, and how the nitrogen is recycled, and there's all sorts of things still to think about. But a lot of big things about living on the moon have been thought about in this first representation of a colony. And the plan now is that we have enough done that I can show you new things like this, hopefully once a month, hopefully even more than that once we're really rolling. So thanks for spending this time with me, and I hope you'll come back and see some more of these new things about living on the moon. And please visit moonwards.com.